Every field manual said he should stay behind the lines. Every tactical doctrine warned against what he was about to do. But on January 24, 1945, one lieutenant made a decision that changed the definition of calculated risk. This isn't a story about recklessness. It's a story about understanding exactly how far you can push doctrine without breaking it, and accepting a responsibility most officers would never take. Setting the scene. January 1945, near Husson, France, the frozen forests of Alsace. While most remember the Battle of the Bulge that winter, another desperate struggle was unfolding 300 miles south. The Colmar Pocket, the last German-held territory in France. 850 square miles of frozen ground that the Germans refused to give up. First Lieutenant Garlin Murl stood in the 3rd Battalion command post that morning. 25 years old, intelligence officer for the 7th Infantry Regiment. He'd recently returned from the hospital. Wounds still healing. This was his 4th year of war. The German 19th Army had massed forces for a counterattack. 600 infantry troops, 6 Mark VI Tiger tanks, 60-ton monsters designed to break through defensive lines. They were coming straight at 3rd Battalion's positions. Connor's role? Intelligence officer. His job was to gather information, interrogate prisoners, mark enemy positions on maps. Not a combat role. Intelligence officers worked behind the lines. They didn't lead attacks. But this morning, everything was about to change. Why his decision one unusual? When the German artillery barrage hit, it destroyed the forward observation posts. The observers who normally directed artillery fire were dead or wounded. Without them, the American guns were blind. The battalion needed someone forward, someone who could see the German advance and direct the artillery. But getting to that position meant running 400 yards across open ground, under enemy fire. Then staying there, exposed, while 600 enemy soldiers and 6 tanks advanced directly toward you. For an intelligence officer to volunteer for this mission was extraordinary. It violated every tactical principle. Intelligence officers stayed at command posts. Forward observers were specially trained for calling artillery. They understood the math, the timing, the danger. Connor understood something else. He understood that without accurate artillery fire, the battalion would be overrun. The Tigers would roll through the defensive positions. Hundreds of American soldiers would die or be captured. The entire front line could collapse. So he picked up a telephone and a spool of wire, and he ran. The action. The distance was 400 yards. Open ground. German shells began landing before he was halfway there. They were adjusting their fire, trying to hit the lone American soldier running toward their attack. Connor kept moving. Each step broke through the snow crust. The wire spool unrolled behind him. At 250 yards, a shell destroyed a tree directly in his path. He vaulted over the fallen trunk without stopping. Shrapnel hissed in the snow around him. He made it to a shallow ditch about 30 yards beyond the American foxholes, maybe 18 inches deep. Not deep enough to stop bullets, not deep enough to protect against artillery, but deep enough to give him a sightline toward the advancing Germans while keeping his profile low. The telephone wire had held. He cranked the handset, connected to the artillery fire direction center 3 miles behind the lines. 12 105mm howitzers. Now he was their eyes. The concept is called danger close in military terminology. It means friendly forces are within 600 meters of the target. Connor was about to push that doctrine to its absolute limit. He raised his head above the ditch rim. The German infantry were 200 yards away, moving through the trees in professional squad formations. Behind them, the Tigers. 4 visible at first, then all 6. Massive 60-ton monsters pushing through the forest like the trees were nothing. He directed the first shells. Fire mission. Enemy infantry in the open. The shells landed 150 yards behind the German formation. Too far. He adjusted immediately. Drop 100. Fire for effect. 18 seconds later, the next salvo landed in the middle of the German advance. The forest erupted. Trees disintegrated. Each 105mm shell carried 14 pounds of high explosive. 12 shells. 168 pounds of explosive detonating simultaneously among 600 men packed into attack formations. The German infantry scattered. Squad formations broke apart. The advance stopped, but the Tigers kept coming. Artillery couldn't reliably kill tanks. The shells might damage tracks or optics, but the armor was too thick. The massive tanks continued rolling forward. 300 yards from the American foxholes. Then 200. Then 150. One Tiger fired its 88mm gun. An American foxhole 300 yards away exploded. The soldiers in it were dead. Another Tiger fired. Another foxhole obliterated. The German infantry was regrouping, using the tanks for cover, advancing in disciplined formations. Professional soldiers who knew how to attack defended positions, and they had spotted Connor's position. They could see the telephone wire trailing across the snow. They knew someone was directing the American artillery. They started moving toward him. The critical moment. This is where the story separates from Hollywood myths. Connor didn't call artillery on himself in some suicidal gesture. He made a precise calculation. He knew the blast radius of a 105mm shell. He knew how close he could bring the fire without certain death. He understood terrain, understood how the ditch would provide minimal protection from fragments. He accepted the risk because the alternative was worse. When German soldiers closed to within dozens of yards, Connor gave coordinates that put American shells dangerously close to his own position. Not directly on top of him, but close enough that fragments hit the edge of his ditch. Close enough that any error in targeting would kill him. He stayed in that ditch for 3 hours, directing fire, adjusting coordinates, keeping the shells falling exactly where they needed to be. The temperature was 10 degrees below zero. His body went numb. German counter-battery fire tried to kill him. His own artillery nearly killed him. But the German attack stalled. The Tigers were immobilized or destroyed. The infantry took catastrophic casualties and withdrew. 3rd Battalion held its positions. The tactical impact was local but decisive. In that moment, on that section of line, Connor's decision to accept extraordinary risk prevented a breakthrough that could have had far wider consequences. Aftermath and recognition. Lieutenant General Alexander Patch presented Connor with the Distinguished Service Cross on February 10, 1945. His battalion commander had recommended the Medal of Honor. But Connor was being sent home. 28 consecutive months in combat. 7 wounds. The paperwork moved slowly. By the time it reached higher headquarters, Connor was already on a ship back to the United States. He was discharged in June 1945. He married Pauline Wells a month later. They settled on a farm in Kentucky. Connor became president of the Clinton County Farm Bureau. He helped other veterans file benefit claims. He never talked about what happened in France. When people asked about his medals, he said he'd left those memories across the Atlantic Ocean. The Distinguished Service Cross, 4 Silver Stars, Bronze Star, Purple Hearts. They all went into a cardboard box in the back of a closet. 53 years passed. In 1996, a veteran researching his uncle's service met Connor and saw those medals. He began a campaign to upgrade the Distinguished Service Cross. The Army Board rejected it. Twice. Connor died in 1998, still largely unknown outside his Kentucky community. But his widow Pauline continued the fight for 22 years, through rejections and appeals, through federal court, through congressional legislation to waive time limits. On June 26, 2018, President Trump presented the Medal of Honor to Pauline, 73 years after the action that earned it. Conclusion: Garlin Murl Connor was the second most decorated soldier of World War II. Yet almost no one knew his name until 2018. His story reminds us that battlefield courage is often quiet, disciplined, misunderstood. It's about judgment under pressure, about understanding doctrine well enough to know when it must be pushed to its limit, about accepting responsibility that others won't. Connor didn't survive January 24, 1945, because he was reckless. He survived because he made precise calculations about risk and accepted consequences most officers would refuse. That's not luck. That's leadership. And sometimes that leadership goes unrecognized for decades. If this story moved you, help us rescue more forgotten heroes from history. Hit that like button. It tells the algorithm to share stories like this with more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're bringing you documented acts of courage that deserve to be remembered. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Garlin Murl Connor's story doesn't disappear into silence.